You're listening to Scalay Sisters, episode number 71. Welcome to Scalay Sisters, the podcast for the classical homeschooling mama who seeks to learn and grow while she's helping her children learn and grow. Scalay Sisters is a casual conversation about topics that matter to those of us in the trenches of classical homeschooling who yearn for something more than just checking boxes and getting it all done. I'm Brandy Venzel, but I am not your host today because Misty and Pam cut me out and chatted with Andrew Pudewa without me. I'll tell you a little bit about Misty and Pam, though. Misty Winkler is a second-generation homeschooler with 5 kids and too many projects. With her blog, podcast, and membership, she helps you organize your attitude so you can organize your life. Find her over at simplyconvivial.com. Pam Barnhill is a speaker, podcaster, blogger at pambarnhill.com, and author of 2 fabulous books, Better Together and Plan Your Year. Have you signed up for spring training yet? If not, what are you waiting for? We are very excited about this year's coach, Stephen Rummelsberg, and the chance to have a great conversation about the great conversation. Head on over to scolaysisters.com/springtraining to register. Our special guest today is Andrew Pudewa, founder and director of the Institute for Excellence in Writing. Traveling and speaking around the world, Andrew addresses issues related to teaching, writing, thinking, spelling, and music with clarity, insight, practical experience, and humor. His seminars for parents, students, and teachers have helped to transform many a reluctant writer and have equipped educators with powerful tools to dramatically improve students' skills. Although he is a graduate of the Talent Education Institute in Japan and holds a certificate of child brain development from the Institutes for the Achievement of Human Potential in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, his best endorsement is from a young Alaskan boy who called him the funny man with the wonderful words. Andrew and his wife Robin have homeschooled their 7 children and are now proud grandparents of 14. Today's episode was recorded before the demise of 2020, before quarantines, lockdowns, and economic tragedies. I cut a couple things that no longer made sense, but the rest of it survives as useful and oh so encouraging. Andrew Pudewa helps us be brave and not hide our homeschooling light under a bucket. He says we should be practicing homeschool evangelism. And when he said this, no one knew the entire country would be doing school at home by the time this went live. What Andrew says here is even more applicable than when he first said it. And so, without further ado, let's get to it.
Well, my Scalay every day, I am reading Dumbing Us Down, The Hidden Curriculum of Compulsory Schooling by John Taylor Gatto. And I think I've read some of his stuff online. You know, you used to could read, it was one of his books online. And so I had read at least a portion of it, but I've never got a printed version. And so I was working on a talk and felt like this book would be helpful for that talk. And so I got it and I have really been enjoying it.
I know I own that book and I've read bits and pieces, but I don't know if I've ever read the whole thing.
Well, you know, it's interesting because it's actually a series of talks or essays, either talks or essays. And so it's really great because you don't have to carry a thought all the way through. You know, I can sit and read one and then put it down for a couple of days and then pick it up again and read the next one. And it works out really well for that. Every once in a while, it's a tiny bit depressing to think about some of, you know.
Sure.
Yeah. So I got that book before I was homeschooling. My kids were all very young. I had hit the age of about 30 and I read Gatto's book, Dumbing Us Down. And I was so excited by that book because I thought, yes, this explains why I am so stupid. I'm sure you've had that experience.
Yes.
You're like all grown up. And then at some point you realize how profoundly ignorant and uneducated you really are. And you wonder, with this work and life and family, am I ever going to get an education? And I love the book because I thought maybe it isn't completely my own fault. Maybe there was a system and it was doing something to me.
I think the older I get, the more I realize how little I know. You know, that's like my big revelation as I get older and older. It's like, you just don't know very much at all. And then sometimes I'm struck by, and Andrew, you and I spoke about this actually kind of recently, a few months ago. We were talking about John Sr., and you were telling me about his idea for a school and how, it was impractical. And sometimes I almost feel that way about what Gatto's saying as well. There's he has all of these grand ideas, but I'm not sure how practical they are, in widespread usage. But I'm taking notes.
Yeah, but all of his books, Dumbing Us Down, and then his big magnum opus, The Underground History of American Education, and then a further collection of essays, Weapons of Mass Instruction. They really are depressing, but necessary. Depressing in that you kind of do get the feeling like it's overwhelming, it's too behemothing, it is never going to change until society as we know it collapses and it's the end of the world as we redesign ourselves up out of the ashes. But it's necessary because I believe our greatest handicap in teaching our children is the way we were taught. It's very hard not to do to your kids what was done to you. And so to the degree the books help you break that paradigm so you can then go and rebuild, very, very useful. And I met John Taylor Gatto several times. Wonderful man. He died just a couple of years ago, and quite a remarkable storyteller.
Yeah. And then I'm loving his differences between networks and community. I read some Wendell Berry earlier this year, actually Hannah Coulter. And so I'm making all of these connections with that as well. And so I've told Misty that we're going to have some more episodes kind of hashing out some of these topics that are in here.
Mm-hmm.
So that's mine.
All right. Well, mine is One Day in the Life of Ivan Desanovich. Is that?
Sure, that sounds right.
Sounds good enough.
The Russian names.
I think it's Denisovich.
Denisovich. Okay. It's a Russian novel that's actually short. So I should have done this one as my first Russian novel, but I got actually halfway through in one sitting earlier this week, and I am waiting until I have 2 hours to read altogether because I have a feeling once I pick this up again, I'm not putting it down until I finish. So it's the story of a prisoner in one of Stalin's work camps, and it's actually quite gripping.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's depressing, but it's a Russian novel, so that's what I was expecting.
Most definitely.
It's Solzhenitsyn, right?
Yes. Yeah. I wasn't even going to try to say his name, but there you go. You got it.
Yeah. He is most well known for the Gulag Archipelago.
Yeah.
And long time since I've read it, but it's very good right now, especially I think for us to be reading about the great tragedy of totalitarian socialism, communism, where it has occurred, since it appears that many young people have virtually no awareness of the last century's history in that regard.
Yeah. Like, this is what you want, huh?
I think maybe we should assign this as reading to lots of people.
How about you, Andrew?
Well, I just finished a biography of Frederick Douglass by David W. Blight. It was a very long book. I actually listened to it on Audible. Very well read, very well researched. I had, of course, read a couple of the versions of the autobiographies of Frederick Douglass, but I was very drawn to this one because I wanted to know more detail about his early life and how he was educated, because, you know, he basically grew up in a situation where he was, you know, separated from his mother at a young age, never knew his father. It was illegal to teach enslaved people at that time in that place to write or read or really anything. He was, you know, in a kind of harsh and brutal type of slavery circumstance. So you would say he had probably the worst possible education during the most formative period of his life. And yet, as an adult, he became, I would argue, the greatest orator that this country has ever produced, at least from his time forward. You read some of his speeches and you think there is no one alive who could speak with that type of eloquence and power and rhetorical mastery that I'm aware of, at least not in the English language. So I was just most curious about that. And then it got very interesting, as he did escape to the North, and then he married and became, very, very active on the abolitionist circuit. And his relationship with Abraham Lincoln was a bit on the rocky side too, because Lincoln had some various views that weren't compatible with Douglas's absolute equality and equal rights, a la, the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal. So I recommend it. It was a bit over detailed in some points, as a very long biography can be. And it portrayed him as, a real human with some incredible strengths and some weaknesses and some hopes and dreams that weren't fulfilled during his life. I found it very inspiring, and especially the whole part about how he trained himself in rhetoric.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Brandy talks about that in a talk that she has, and I actually pull from her and use it in my talk on morning time, and it sits right up there next to Andrew Pudewa for why do we memorize things. So I have Andrew Pudewa in one paragraph, and then I have Frederick Douglass in the next paragraph, talking about how Douglass memorized those speeches and internalized those forms, and then was able to turn around and use them to form his own speeches that he wrote. So
yeah, and not just speeches, huge chunks of scripture too. Mm-hmm. I mean, he could quote the prophets and quote the gospels and kind of integrate it just seamlessly into his speeches. I recommend everyone read his speech, What to the Slave is the 4th of July. That's usually the title it gets. And just as an exercise, read it and look for every biblical quote or allusion that you can find. And you realize how packed that is.
Cool.
All right. Well, that's probably a good transition into our topical discussion for this episode. This episode came about because I heard one of Andrew's talks at the Paideia Northwest conference in November last year, and just thought it was so good and wanted to share it with our audience. And I tried looking it up and I could not find the title of it. I ended up not getting a program from the conference, but I know that it had multiple alliteration. I think it was C words.
Yes. It was probably Conquering Corrupt Culture by Raising Christian Communicators.
Yes, that's what it was. So, of course, the alliteration spoke to me. And I actually thought it was going to be the Nurturing Competent Communicators with a new title, but it was not. And it was so good to hear as someone, I was homeschooled myself, and now I'm homeschooling my kids. My oldest is 16 and my youngest is 7. And I know you've also been in the homeschooling world for a very long time as someone who has homeschooled and graduated kids and has also been teaching both homeschool kids and public school kids. So your experience in the world of education is very broad and of a long duration.
Yeah, I've been blessed with a myriad of experiences and 3 decades now. So yeah. That does give you perspective.
Yeah. A lot of times it does seem like as homeschoolers, we can either kind of get caught up in fads or trends and get excitement based on, what's new or exciting at the time, or then also fall into, wondering if all of this work is actually worth it and what we're actually doing. And maybe we're just making this all up and we're actually just utter failures.
Okay. Well, I was not there. So Andrew, could you give me a brief summary of the talk and kind of what the premise or the thesis of it was?
Sure. The outline for the talk is the title. So it has a little bit of twist in it. conquering corrupt culture by raising Christian communicators. So there's those words, those 6 words. And so I start out with this word conquering, pointing out that we really need to acknowledge the fact that we are in a war, not just a battle, but a long-term campaign. And I believe this is happening on 3 fronts all at the same time. One front is the war against me personally. I need to remember that there is an evil force, an evil one with minions who would like to take me out. And therefore, I am under attack. Those who do good, those who want to do good, will be opposed. Sometimes it's easy to forget that or to assume you're impervious. But I told the story of a friend of mine who just got completely taken out. He was no longer able to do any of the good work that he had been doing. The second front is the war against my family. I've always felt, that there's just this like toxic gas trying to seep its way into, my home and the minds and hearts of me and my children and my family. And so there's a need to be kind of on constant guard about that. And then, of course, the war against my culture, the culture that I love, Western civilization, the good, the true, the beautiful that we have a heritage of, but it just seems to be under such a violent attack. And I point out that it's easy to grow weary when you feel like you're always on the defensive. If you're in a sports game and you're losing, it's really hard to get re-momentumed, if that's a word, to do well, to continue the fight, to turn the tide. So I realized that I was very tired because I was always on the defensive and that I needed to go more on the offensive. But also I note that when you go on the offensive, you run the risk of becoming offensive to some people. But fortunately, I kind of got old enough to outgrow one of my worst character qualities, and that is a desire to be loved and liked by everybody. So I guess I'm curmudgeonish enough now, almost 60 years old, that I don't have to be loved and liked by absolutely everyone. So that was the conquering part, and just a contemplation of that idea that, we're in this actual military engagement, if you will, and we can prioritize our time and talents and resources accordingly.
So you feel that the way that we do this, the way that we fight this battle, this war that you're talking about is through homeschooling?
Well, so here's the idea. I mean, the corrupt culture, we'll bundle those two together in interests of time. I would argue, in fact, I did argue and continue to believe that the most insidious element is what I would call the non-gospel, the not good news of relativism. That, you can have your truth, she can have her truth, he can have his truth, I can have my truth. But the one thing we must all believe dogmatically is that all truth is equally valid and good. That, of course, undermines the whole nature of what it means to be human and desire for truth. And when we undermine that, we see the undermining of all 3 of the transcendentals. So if you undermine beauty and you create ugliness, you produce music that is objectively ugly, you build buildings that are objectively ugly, you see trends and fashions that are disordered, you have to say, well, that's undermining our sensitivity to beauty. And then the next thing that goes is, morality. And then the next thing that goes, of course, is objective truth. So if we see then what public schools basically do better than any other institution, I would say, is they indoctrinate children in this state religion that all truth is actually no truth because every truth is equally true. And, when a child goes into a public school, every textbook they pick up, every conversation they have with another child, every interaction with a teacher is essentially predicated on that idea. And so, depending how long you spend in a school, 12 years, that's 14,400 hours. And that's the biggest lesson that the schools have taught very successfully. If we don't want our children to grow up and not believe that truth can be known, we need to do something about it. And I would argue you can't undo that much 14,400 hours of programming over 12 years. You can't undo that with, Wednesday Awanas and a couple hours on Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have a radical lifestyle change. So for many of us, that means leave that system and do something else. And whether that's, start a school, find a great school, get behind it, or homeschool, which seems to be the most efficient way to educate children. That's your hope, as far as I can tell.
Right. It's not so much even the academics then in homeschooling as much as building the culture that we actually want to be a part of.
Right. There are schools with great academics and schools with very bad academics. There are homeschoolers with great academics and homeschoolers with pretty weak academics. But I am pretty well convinced now all my children are grown and I have school-age grandchildren and I'm looking at the whole thing in this perspective. I think academics is one of the least important things about growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And we tend to be mostly afraid of that because, oh no, if academics isn't good, test scores won't be good, can't get into a good college, won't get a good job, be poor and miserable your whole life because you didn't have good academics. But the empirical world around us does not support that premise at all. Look at all the people who are very successful in many, many different ways, who perhaps did not do well in school, whatever their situation might have been. But it's the intangibles that make the big difference. A thought experiment I like to try with groups of moms. You've probably heard the College Board uses these buzzwords, college and career readiness. Have you heard that expression?
Mm-hmm.
I hate that expression. But anyway, here's the thought experiment. I'll ask, a group of people I'm speaking to. So let's pretend that you are either teaching high school graduates in a college or university environment, or that you have to hire and supervise high school graduates in a business environment. Just pretend that you have one of those two roles in life, and maybe you do. Would you please tell me some of the things that you would like this high school graduate to come with? And you can get, what do you think people say?
Work ethic.
Work ethic.
Honesty.
Honesty.
Responsibility.
Responsibility. I've even heard things like show up on time.
Yeah.
Pleasant to be around.
Pleasant to be around, and I own a business. I hire people. What do I like? I like teachableness, kind of a gratitude, just an attitude of gratitude and humility. Jump in, do any job that needs to be done. That type of humility, hungry.
Initiative.
Have initiative. So I have done this hundreds of times. And I would say 98% of anything that anyone says has nothing to do with things that you learn in textbooks or in classrooms in terms of what the College Board would pretend is college and career readiness in terms of reading, writing, and math and general knowledge. No, they're all character issues. They're all in the intangible world, things that are primarily developed where?
In the home.
In the home.
In the home and in mentored relationships with other adults. And you think back in your life, where did you learn the most important lessons that helped you become who you are today? And at least one of you said you were homeschooled. I can't remember which one.
Yep. Yeah. Misty. Yep.
Yeah, Misty. And so you think, what were those lessons? It wasn't learning how to divide fractions so much as it was being coached through life to develop those character qualities and skills by your parents and other important mentors. And I'm not saying there aren't good teachers in schools. There's good teachers in every school, but the system itself is not set up to make character a priority.
Well, and really, if you think about it, character is not something that's separate from truth. So that if you deny that truth is knowable or even exists, you've really just denied right there the basis for character building right there from the outset.
Yeah, I think so. And, it extends to what's good and what's beautiful. Do you interact with people in a way that is good and beautiful? They're all very interconnected in this magnificent way. And of course, a lot of people would say, who is the source of knowledge of goodness, truth, and beauty? And that's another thing that is kind of systematically eliminated from the environment in the schools, especially the very secular public schools. So raising the idea, so conquering corrupt culture, raising. So this is an interesting word because normally you would think it means raising kids who will be good Christian communicators. But I do a little equivocation here on the audience and say, no, I'm going to talk about what do you raise if you're in a war? Armies.
An army.
Troops, yeah.
And so I issue the challenge to say, okay, there's some good news about Christian homeschoolers in general, and that is that we do tend to both out-educate and out-populate the bad guys. and I used that. I'm glad you laughed because obviously I'm not calling people bad so much as there are people who are not necessarily aligned with our goals of a culture of goodness, truth, and beauty. So the idea then would be we can outpopulate, we can have kids faster, but is it fast enough? Are we coming on the radar? Is there the chance that homeschooling could be attacked, say, legally, constitutionally? We easily take for granted our homeschooling rights, which were, by the way, hard won by the pioneers and the warriors at HSLDA. We take for granted that we can do this homeschooling business. But you look at some other countries.
We don't realize how recent those freedoms really are and how it's become normal, but that's not that. That's a very recent development.
Yeah. I'm going to plug a podcast episode I did with Steve Demme back in the fall, where he talked about that entire history and how, he's seen that this generation of homeschooler, they're kind of, I would be included in this generation of homeschooler. We're kind of removed from that and don't remember what it was like to fight those battles and everything. So it was really interesting. It was an interesting conversation.
Yeah. If we come on the screen and start the attack is usually some variation of this argument. This professor of sociology at Stanford, a guy named Rob Reich, kind of laid it out this way. Christian homeschoolers are the most likely of people to teach their children intolerance. Intolerance is the enemy of a free society. Therefore, Christian homeschoolers are an enemy of a free society. And while there's some serious logical flaw in that syllogism, you can see how that could very easily be adapted and spun by the media and put out in such a way that your basic ignorant person would say, wow, we sure don't want anybody to have the freedom to raise intolerant children. Let's regulate this. Let's dictate a curriculum. Let's control it. And if they won't conform, let's make it illegal. I think, and my argument is, if we want to raise this army, we need to speed up. Simple exponential reproduction takes too many decades. We need to recruit. We need to help people. Because, honestly, we are the normal people. We're not average, but we're normal. You know what's abnormal would be sending your kids to a building to spend all day in which you are barely able to walk in without special permission and an escort.
Mhm.
Reading books that you're almost not allowed to even look at, being taught by people you know nothing about, associating with other people's children you also know nothing about. That's kind of abnormal when you think about it.
Yeah, if you knew any history at all.
What is normal is keep your kids at home, teach them the way they're best taught according to their, neurology and personality and the pacing, and you can enhance their interests. You can inculcate, values that you want to pass on to the next generation. That's actually the normal way that families have worked.
It's amazing how, this has only been 150, 160 years, but now nobody would ever think the abnormal has become the normal in such a short time in human history. And so it amazes me at how quickly some of these things, the propaganda, the taking of people's kids and putting them in school when they didn't want them to be, just different things like that. It amazes me at how quickly it happens.
Yeah. Part of that, you can read about in Gatto's book,
Mm-hmm.
the incredible state takeover of education, which, there were schools prior to the, end of the 19th century, but they were small, they were village schools, they were controlled locally, parents were extremely involved, they were distinctly Christian. And by the, early 1900s, that entire model had completely shifted and changed. So my challenge to fellow homeschoolers is, what can we do to help people into our world? Because it is a better world, and we are better parents because we chose to homeschool. Our communities are better because people homeschool. The country would be a better place if more people were to choose to homeschool. And maybe it's not for everyone, and yet perhaps we can help people, into an alternative system, a cottage school, a hybrid, half homeschool, half school environment, but something where the parents are much more involved. And what's really interesting to note is that in terms of academic success, the real factor is not whether kids are in a public school or not. The real factor is, are the parents involved? Because always when parents are involved, the academic performance of kids is better. That's just taking it to the next step. One guy I was talking to, he said, well, every parent homeschools. It's just some do it all the time. And it's true when you think about it. I mean, my parents taught me most of the important stuff that I learned and needed to know at home. I put a kid in school a couple times. I had most of my children home, almost all, for the whole 3 decades. But I did put a couple kids in school for short periods of time. And one thing I noticed, 2 things I noticed. First thing I noticed is they very, very quickly became much more peer-oriented, much more concerned and interested with what was going on outside the home with other people than what was going on inside the home. And then the second thing I realized was, good heavens, they go to school all day and then they come home and I still have to, teach them their math facts, drill them on the spelling words, help them write their essays, study for the social stuff. Like, what am I paying for?
We get our schoolwork done in the same amount of hours other kids are still doing homework.
Yeah. We've noticed that too, that a lot of times the amount of homework they get is, I tell the moms, you're sitting there helping them with homework anyway. You might as well be homeschooling.
Just do it in the morning with your coffee.
So I challenge people and say, go out, talk to the family sitting next to you in church, talk to the dad that you work with, talk to your neighbor and say, so what can I do to help you? How can I help you get your kids out of that situation and into a better world? And sometimes I think it's just people need the invite. They need to know there's openness to that world and that you have resources and you will share and you will help them and you will drag them to a convention if need be. And I think more and more, I remember many years ago, someone on some commentary said, well, and this was a couple decades ago, said, everyone knows someone who's gay. Like, it's that widespread now. And we've hit that point, I think, where almost everyone I meet knows someone who homeschools. So we can keep the momentum going. We can invite people into our world.
And, it can be intimidating for people, or people feel maybe inadequate to homeschool. And I think one of the big secrets that probably we need to share more widely is that you or we, as the homeschooling parent, also become educated as we homeschool.
Well, that's secretly why most of us did it anyway. we
I make no
realized
secret about it.
How profoundly ignorant we are, and said, gotta do something about this.
I was homeschooled, but it wasn't until I was taking my third child through fractions. I was like, oh, wait, now I get it.
Sometimes I think that fraction stuff comes with age.
And the age is not 12.
My brain has finally developed to the point that I can get this now. I can understand this.
And that could give us hope if our kids feel like they're not getting it. It's like, well, you know what? You're going to get another chance too. It is lifelong learning. That means that we don't have to worry about our kids having gaps that we can't provide. Like, we all have knowledge gaps and we all keep learning, and that becomes a part of the family and home culture, is reading and wanting to know. And that's a big part of it, is passing on that desire to know and to learn more, to be interested.
Well, and Misty, I mean, you could probably think, I believe that how children learn things is probably more significant than what they actually learn in terms of information. How you learn kind of forms your intellect. It creates a cognitive faculty. It creates some of those things that we like to see: initiative and the willingness to pursue an interest, even when it takes effort. The facts come and go. The facts that are really important will come again. But the way we learn, I think that's what makes a huge difference. So often kids get into this mode at school where they know, in fact, everybody in a school knows, you're playing a game. The game is exactly this: how do you get the best grade you can by doing the least amount of work possible?
Yes.
Right? I mean, it's set up that way, and it's very structure in nature. And you play that game year after year after year. Well, what does it do? It creates, this cynicism and this kind of passivity and this why do more than you have to attitude. And it doesn't fit well with real life. It doesn't fit well with business. It doesn't fit well with ministry. It surely doesn't fit well with having a family and raising children. But I think in the homeschool world, to the degree you can kind of get away from that school at home, and here we are, we're learning, we're getting excited, we're going to spend more time to do something here because it interests us and it's drawing us. And we're not going to worry about being prepared for some multiple choice test that's really irrelevant in the big picture. I think it's good for all parents to reflect back on what were the formative things in their own childhood and growing up. Are we able to see opportunities for similar, really important formative experiences in our own kids' lives?
Yeah, I remember my formative years were before there was the internet. And I would say that the formative educational experience was really that we always went to the library at least once a week. And it was not just us. It wasn't just my dad taking us to the library for something that we did, and so that the kids could get books. My dad came home with as many books as we did. So he wanted to go to the library Mom wanted us to go to the library because he took all the kids. That was like her looking back and like, oh, now I know why Dad took us to the library every Saturday. But what I learned was if you want to know something, and you will want to know something, there's always things to be interested in. What you do is you check out 5 books. You haven't really gotten started unless you've checked out 5 books on whatever it is you want to know about or whatever it is you want to learn how to do. Step number 1, find 5 books. And it's not like he ever said that or taught us that with words so much as just those patterns of the way of life, the way that we did things.
Yeah. The intangibles.
Mm-hmm.
But, I had the same experience. I was in public school and my library was on the way home, where I walked by myself for blocks and blocks. Imagine that. And I would stop and pick up a bunch of books and take them home. And my goal was always to get done as quickly as possible with my work in class so that I could pull out my book and continue to read.
Yeah.
So we had a very similar experience. I mean, that was my formative education, was how much I could read. And the only other time I think that came equal to that was when I was exposed to a teacher who was really passionate about whatever it was they were teaching. And then I was able to kind of, sit in their class and soak up. And I can only think of like a couple through all of the years. But once I found that person, that was always a big thing. So those 2 things, the reading and then the really passionate teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. One thing I finish up with in that talk is the word communicators. And of course, people assume I'm going to talk about teaching, language skills, speaking and writing. But I point out that there are many kids who have a passion, or they have, I wouldn't even say a passion, they have the seed of a passion, even a seed for an aptitude for some other forms of communicating truth and beauty into the world. Music, for example, film, the poetry of the age, unfortunately, architecture, design. These are things that communicate and have the capacity to communicate the truth, to bring beauty into the world, to lead people to more goodness. And Lord knows we need better music. Look at the power of a really good movie, a movie that inspires greatness, a movie that sticks with you like a book that always reminds you of heroism or sacrifice or commitment. We need more of these things. So what I point out is that when you choose to homeschool, you immediately have freedom for your children to pursue those types of aptitudes and passions. Because as you said, you can do most of the schoolwork in a fraction of the time you'd be sitting in a school. And you have all this other time to pursue that. So when we think about communicating, not just, and of course, I believe, the writing and speaking business is very important and valuable, but it's not the only way that our kids can grow up to incarnate the good and the true and the beautiful in the culture around them.
Yeah. And I think that speaks to not overscheduling, just allowing that free time. Sometimes free time like that is scary or, we feel like it's our job as parents to give our kids things to do all the time. Or if they don't have something, quote unquote, productive to do, then they're unmanageable or, something's wrong. But it's often that length of free time where they start developing those interests.
Yes, my friend Martin Cawthron, I think you may know him. He is writing an article, at least he always says he is, entitled "In Praise of Boredom." And unfortunately, I think back, I was pre-internet. I mean, there was television, but that was very controlled and limited. It was those large empty chunks of non-entertainment time where what do? Well, you finish your homework. Okay, you could go outside. You could climb a tree. You could practice your violin a little bit more than you have to. You can pull an encyclopedia off the shelf and and read that. You can go to the library and get a book. I fear, though, that most children, even ours, certainly my youngest two would fall in this category, somehow they grew up with this sense of entitlement to be entertained all the time, much more than I was. And I'm sure my parents were less entitled to entertainment than I felt as a child. And I don't know what we can do about this culturally. It's very hard to just completely unplug and disconnect and say no to screens. But at the same time, in a way, it was such a healthier world for children.
And my mom always said that if we were bored, it was our own fault. We should just go fix that. That's not her problem. That's our problem. She would give us work to do. Like if we told mom that we were bored, then she was sure to find a chore. So we never said we were bored.
Yeah. And I fear fewer and fewer parents are in touch with that ideal enough to actually enforce it. And more are likely to say, oh, okay, here's an iPad, keep you out of my hair, But another reason to homeschool, it brings you into a world where the priorities shift a little bit and you start to see, reducing the influence of technology. That's another thing that just irks me. Racing headlong toward this abyss of let's get a tablet and a Chromebook for every single kid in the school. Let's get a paperless classroom going here. If they don't have computers, they will grow up and not survive in a science, technology, engineering, and mathematics world. And it's so untrue. In fact, all the research, and I have done some of the research on the research, I have collected it up. Almost everything you come across shows an inverse correlation between technology in the classroom and basic skills. The more computers the kids have, the lower are their reading, writing, and math skills. The zero tech schools, like a Waldorf or Montessori, where there's no computers at all anywhere, those kids have the highest basic skills. Obviously, the virtues in the balance, knowing how to appropriately use it. But it is one reason. I've actually talked to parents who pulled their kids out of a school because they were trying to get these, fifth graders doing everything on a Chromebook.
Last time I took my kids to the eye doctor, she was giving them an exam and saying that she could tell that they weren't Chromebook kids. And she's always so sad when she sees Chromebook kids because it's awful for their eyes and their brain-eye connection.
That's interesting. Well, Andrew, one of the things that we say on the podcast here is that we need to build community and find our sisters. What would you encourage School A sisters to do to help each other out, especially those who are newer to homeschooling?
Well, I think one of the very valuable things, I won't say the most important because that might be presumptuous, but I think one of the very valuable things is to essentially do what you want to do, but you're afraid to do it because you don't think it's important enough. But that is get some kind of book club or group or gathering that you can form if there isn't one, or join in if there is one, and make that a high priority so that you can fill yourself up. If you're in good condition, you can teach well, you can homeschool well. If you're drained, if you're tired, if you're not intellectually full, it's very hard to keep up that energy level. I know there's many kind of groups. There's one my wife and one of my daughters does. It's called The Well-Read Mom. And it's a nationwide, very informal, I believe. Someone started it and they just all get the same book and read it and meet once a month. And I know how much my daughter, who has 3 children, 7 and under, I know how much she values that time. Dad's with the kids. She's gone for 3 or 4 hours, drink tea, talk about a book. Just that can be so intellectually and emotionally refreshing. So that would be one thing that's going to draw some people together, common purpose.
And then that gives you a place to invite people who might be interested or on the fence. You're like, well, come come hang out with us and see that we aren't all, or we're weird in a good way.
Yeah. I think conventions also have a certain value in that way. There, of course, is a trend of decreasing attendance at homeschool conferences and conventions, mainly because the millennial mom does not really get the idea that you would spend time and money and travel somewhere in order to get information and shop.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Millennial mom says, well, if you want to get information and shop, you do that at home, online, in your pajamas, and it's easy. So there's that tendency, oh, do I really want to go to a convention, blah, blah, blah. But nobody ever went to a homeschool convention and then afterwards said, sure wish I hadn't done that.
Right.
You always have takeaways. You always met someone that inspired you. Always heard that little nugget that you're going to remember and rely on. You always have even a perspective on what you don't want to do is sometimes valuable. So, I encourage people, if you've never been to a homeschool convention, you've got very little to lose and so much to gain. And if you were years ago, give it another shot. It does a lot for you. Do you know, ladies, what percentage of homeschoolers would you guess go to a single homeschool convention in any given year? This is an estimate, of course, but what do you think the statistic would show?
I would think it's under 5%.
You're right. Yep, it's right around 5%. If you add up the total number of, quote, homeschoolers, depending on whose numbers you use, and then you add up the total convention attendance for the whole country for every show, it's about 5%. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Where are all these people? They're missing out.
And you know what struck me? The very first homeschool convention I went to, and I think my oldest was maybe 6 at the time. So she's 14 now. We're talking a number of years ago. Oh goodness, she may have been even younger than that. And I joined a homeschool group when she was 4 because I was looking for people to be with. So I knew my local people, but I was also seeking from that convention, what are these people like that I'm getting myself aligned with? You
went to people watch.
Yeah. And I was like, there were so many different kinds of people there. That was what was so wonderful. And it was just very reassuring to me that it wasn't just one kind of person. There were so many different kinds of people there. And I saw people that I could relate to, and it made it seem so normal to me. We were all doing the same thing. Yeah, that was really encouraging to me. And you don't get that on a large scale like you do unless you go to a convention.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a third thing that kind of came to mind as you were saying that, some people find themselves in churches where it seems like there are a lot of homeschooling families. And then some people find themselves in churches where there's very few, if any, others than themselves. And of course, choosing a church is something where there are many factors involved, I'm sure. But I think in terms of creating community, that's one of the best places to start, is to perhaps find a church that is appropriate to your theology or denomination, as well as your schedule and location and size preference. Some people like very, very big churches. Other people prefer different. But if you can find a church that is, I guess, friendly, supportive of homeschooling in general, or specifically even opens up to homeschool events, you're going to then find those like-minded people that you can develop both community relationships and personal friendships. So I know in our case, it was wonderful to be actually usually in a small church and find a good number of the people were or had been homeschooling.
Yeah, finding those people you can kind of do life with on multiple levels, where it's education, friends, church, where your different compartments aren't compartments in your life. They all just kind of blend together. And that's possible with homeschooling in a way that it isn't when your time is more compartmentalized.
Yeah, that goes back to that community building that Gatto is talking about, as opposed to just having a network, having that community instead. And that's, we actually went to church this morning, and all the homeschoolers came together. But then the same people are coming to my house tonight for one of my kids' birthday parties. So
nice.
Yeah. So I think one of the most inspiring things that I've heard today is Andrew talking about basically what we encourage everybody to do, and it's find those sisters, to get those book clubs together, to meet with those groups of moms. Though certainly you could have some communities where there were dads too, and read together so that you can fill up before you start to teach your kids. So Andrew, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about this and how we can kind of evangelize as homeschoolers and bring more people in.
Yes, thank you so much.
It's been a great pleasure. You ladies are fun to be with, and I hope I will bump into you in person sometime in the not distant future, and probably at a homeschool convention.
Probably so.
All right, thank you.
That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening and being a part of the sisterhood of the podcast. Make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss any of the episodes coming out this season. At Scholay Sisters, we want to be people who apply what we learn rather than just listening and then forgetting. Scholay Sheets are individual journal pages to help you apply the ideas you've taken in. The Scholay Sheets have been redesigned, and this is your first chance to get the new version. Download your Scholay Sheet for free from our show notes at scholaysisters.com/SS71. Don't forget to register for Spring Training 2020. Did you know? If you sign up for a Sophie Level Sistership membership or already have one, Spring Training is included, along with all the other great things. I'm looking at you, Kelly Cumby's Amazing Shakespeare Mentorship. If you aren't a Sophie, go sign up at scholaysisters.com/sistership. If you already are a Sophie, I highly encourage you to go through the spring training sessions from 2019 if you haven't already, as a way to prepare for this year's sessions. Next episode is one I've been looking forward to all season. Misty and I finally got a chance to meet Kevin Clark, co-author of The Liberal Arts Tradition. We chatted with him about the new revised edition and dug deeply into the grammar part of the trivium section. It's gonna be amazing. Until then, we want to remind you once again that homeschooling is a marathon you needn't run alone, so open up your eyes and look around you. Find your sisters.
All right. Do you have a good idea for wrapping it up, Pam?
I do not.